Ralph. There, it is Thursday. It is noon. If you're listening, watching live, awesome. Love it. Love to have you here. And hope you send some questions, comments our way throughout this podcast. If you're listening after the fact, welcome. And I hope you have a great weekend or had a great weekend. Max, how we doing, buddy?
Feeling fantastic, Johnny. Summer's here. Weather's pretty good. It's baseball season. Obviously, thick of it. I'm obviously a huge fan. It's also wedding season, as we've well found out for your side of things there, sir. But we're doing well, and I'm most excited for the off season of talking Penn State football, where everything is hypothetical.
Yes, yeah. We actually have things to talk about still
Yeah.
as we're into May. You mentioned wedding season, man. It is. I mean, I'm kind of at the age where like all my friends are either married or getting married, and
Yeah.
have another wedding, a daily collegian wedding.
Heck yeah.
This weekend up in the Allentown area. You're a little young. You'll get there. Uh, but looking forward to that. Looking forward to everything that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk Amare Campbell, linebacker edition from North Carolina, how that affects Penn State's linebacker depth and that outlook there. We'll fold that into a conversation about the defensive depth chart post spring. Bob and I this time last week, we broke down the offensive depth chart and everything that entailed, and we decided like a podcast, like these deserve separate podcasts. And now the Campbell is in the fold. The defensive depth chart might look a little different than it did last week. And then we'll also discuss whether or not Penn State deserves its way too early post-spring number one rankings. A couple of national outlets have thrown them in the top spot. I threw them in my top spot on my way too early to top 25, which published on Penn Live on Thursday morning. So if you haven't already, check that out. And Max, I say we start with Amare Campbell. We start with the defense, how it looks now after his addition from North Carolina via the spring transfer portal, and just your initial thoughts, your reactions to Amare joining Penn State.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Johnny, I'm not sure that there's a happier assistant coach in the country right now than Mr. Dan Connor for Penn State, because you add Amare Campbell, but that's on top of two high school commitments at the linebacker spot, two kids who are maybe even a little under the radar, and Terry Wiggins and Matthew Lama, and like really good players. And I don't know, man, Dan Campbell is getting a lot of talent pushed into his room, but Campbell is just a big one. I mean, it's huge. Like we talked all last season of how much the linebacking core was the weakest point of a really good Penn State defense. And it looked like that was going to be the same thing again this year. And Penn State goes out and fills that hole again. Bob and I talked about it at length on Monday. Like, James Franklin has talked about how they're not a big portal team, but everybody recognizes the potential that this team has, and they have gone out and become a big portal team in the right way. I mean, they've plugged every hole, even more so than they've done in the past few years. And I think Amare Campbell is going to be a really good fit for Jim Knowles' defense because, I mean, the guy had a ton of production as a young player over at UNC. You look at 76 tackles, but the thing that really jumps out for me is 10.5 tackles for loss and 6.5 sacks. I mean, this guy is really athletic and can get after the passer, which is something that, to be able to play a Mike linebacker in this defense that Jim Knowles is going to bring over, you have to be able to rush the passer because they're going to play so much 4-2-5. They're going to ask a lot out of every linebacker. Like, you have to be able to get after the passer. He's an athletic guy that presumably you're going to be able to cover, everywhere across the field from sideline to sideline. Like, I think it's a scheme fit. I think it's really good. I think he's an interesting prospect because of his production at a high level of college football. But then I think the other factor here that, is maybe a little under the radar, guys got 2 years of eligibility left too. Like Penn State is bringing him in not just to plug this year's hole, but it's clearly a guy they feel good about developing and being a part of this roster for the future.
Absolutely. And you look at the linebackers in the room that Penn State has. Obviously, Tony Rojas is a third-year player. He could be back for the 2026 season. But Dom DeLuca, this is his last year, right, at Penn State. So Yeah, looking ahead to 26, but this is also, it's a big move for 25. It's a big move for this fall. Penn State entered spring camp with a bit of a concern, a depth concern, a little thin at linebacker already to begin with, and then they lose in surprising fashion a bit. Tamir Robinson bolting for USC, and so that need, that desire for a spring portal linebacker intensified, especially after Robinson went out west. And you're able to bring in Campbell, who, like you mentioned, Max, has the production, has the size, speed, athleticism that you want in a linebacker. It was a bad UNC defense that he played on last year. I don't think that was his fault. He's not a guy that's just going to erase coverage, misfires and a defense that just was completely out of sorts the entire year. He was a good player on that unit. There were a couple of good players on that unit. Bo Atkinson, defensive lineman, ended up going to Ohio State. And so I like what he brings to the table. In a 4-2-5 defense, he might not start right away. He might not start at all. He might be one of those guys who's like James Franklin will say, like, yeah, he's a third starter for us, in a 4-2-5, where, he might not be credited with any starts if it's Dom and Tony Rojas out there. But he's going to play a lot of snaps for this football team this fall. And looking beyond, the top two there, and Amare, you've got, Keon Wiley in the mix, Anthony Specca, 2-year guy or second-year player, had a really positive spring camp. And so there's bodies there now, an added body and an added athletic body who can make plays for you at linebacker.
I think the important thing about adding Campbell is, like, to understand he's not going to be Superman. He's not coming in and he's not expected to be an all Big Ten player of any sort, but he is experienced, has played on the field, and can give you 150, not 150, more than that, like 500 snaps this season of competent ball. Whereas Penn State did not have, other than, I think Tamir Robinson finished last season with 100 snaps on the nose and, was banged up a little bit. And even when he was in there, the production was questionable. I mean, obviously there's time for him to take a step, play well with USC, whatever. But that's not what you're getting in Campbell. He doesn't have to be a Superman, but he has to be able to be productive and cover some snaps when Rojas and DeLuca are not on the field. And I really think that's exactly what Penn State is getting here with. I mean, like, he has the upside to be an all Big Ten type of player. The athleticism's there. It's just a really interesting add. Behind them in the depth chart, I'm with you. Like, I think Specca could be a really good run-stopping linebacker, in his career. It might not happen this year yet. He might show flashes of it, but I think in his future, he's going to be a really good run-stopping linebacker. But just based off of what we've seen so far in practice, I have some concerns about what he's able to do rushing the passer and potentially in coverage. I mean, who knows? He could always prove us wrong in the fall. But I think the combination of Campbell and Specca at the middle linebacker spot, when Penn State wants to put 3 backers out there, is a huge upgrade over what Penn State had behind Kobe King last season.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, Dakari Nelson in there, there's guys in that group who can definitely take a step, but it's one of those where if you didn't bring in Campbell, if you didn't bring in anyone after losing Robinson, like, they would have been forced to make a step. Yeah. Whereas now I think the intensity on that, the urgency on that isn't necessarily as strong. I mean, obviously Dan Connor is going to take that approach. All these assistant coaches are taking that approach with their players. We saw it throughout spring, and it's going to be the case in August training camp as well. As, like, your time is now. Like, we're not waiting around. The urgency in the program to win a national title is absolutely there, but you don't have to rush play some of the players, a linebacker now, like a Specca, like you would have otherwise if you didn't land Amare Campbell. And I mean, this was a big ad for them, and it's recognized too, Max, nationally, which is interesting to see. We've seen the number one way too early rankings, but we've also seen all the lists that, once the portal closed, of the winners of the spring transfer portal. And Penn State was in all of those lists for him, for bringing in Amare, and obviously bringing in Trevor Pena from Syracuse as well. It's a quality, not quantity kind of thing for Penn State in the portal. It has been for a while, but especially so this offseason. So big ad at linebacker. Let's talk a little defensive depth chart. I feel like we've covered linebacker pretty good
Yep.
there. We'll go defensive end.
Mhm.
And for me, Max, it's just who's going to start opposite denied Dennis Sutton. Now that Abdul Carter is off to the NFL, Amin Vanover denied NCAA waiver, Smith Bilbert entered the portal. You've got a few names in there, a younger guy in Max Granville, an older guy in Zariah Fisher. Kind of where do you see that playing out now that we've had spring ball to watch and the blue-white game to watch?
It's such an interesting group because I think that maybe more than any position on Penn State's roster, it's an unknown, but it's not necessarily a concern. You don't hear like James Franklin going out there and saying, "We need to go get a linebacker," but he's not doing that with defensive end. The group is not experienced. I mean, at all. Even Zariah Fisher, who's the quote unquote veteran, has been hurt for the past 2 entire seasons, basically, or 2 of the last 3, whatever it is. So it's not an experienced group, but there is really no concern there because they know they've got a really good player in Max Granville. Especially just coming into his second season, his first full offseason after the reclassification last year. And then even by the end of the year, they had him in there in the playoff, getting fairly significant snaps behind Abdul Carter. It's not concerning. I think right now, Johnny, if I had to make a depth chart projection like we're doing, I'm putting Granville as the second starter. I think that he has the most upside. I think that he has the most versatility, but it's almost a 1A, 1B situation, I think, with Zariah Fisher, where Zariah Fisher's the 1B because they're all going to play a bunch. I mean, they're going to rotate these guys like crazy. My dark horse, though, Eni White got some buzz in the portal, but the guy I really am interested in is Jalen Harvey. I think he's gonna surprise some people. We saw him out there in the blue-white game, as well as the freshman Ivan Camacho. There are names there. Camacho was out there with the blue team, and you're pointing at me. I'm sure you want to talk a little more in depth about him, or we're gonna point him out. But like, it's an interesting group. But I think maybe first couple weeks of the season, we might be saying, oh, well, nobody's really separated themselves yet. But I think by the end of the season, we're not really going to have any concerns.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a 1A, 1B situation with Zariah Fisher and Max Granville. They bring different things, different assets to the table. Zariah Fisher, like you mentioned, he's a 6-year senior, but he missed 2 years. So it's not like he's got 5 seasons of experience and he's this seasoned guy. I mean, he's seen a lot. He's worked his way back from both of those injuries and received some recognition from both Jim Knowles and Deion Barnes, in winter workouts and spring ball. So it's great to see him be healthy. It's great to see him be in a position to start as a 6-year guy. Max Granville certainly could as well. And we saw the flashes last year as a true freshman. And those 2 guys, I think, will be that 1A, 1B. But behind them, you mentioned Camacho, that's a guy that I really liked watching, the snippets that we got in spring camp, the open media practice windows that we got, and then the blue-white game as well. And I want to I always take it with a grain of salt a little bit, or I try to at least, when the rosters come out for the blue-white game. It's like, all right, someone's on, the blue team, someone's on the white team, and the white team is primarily freshman backups, whatever else. But it was interesting to see him on there. And so, Jalen Harvey certainly had a lot of pub when he was a recruit coming into Penn State. I mean, that was a really big ad for that recruiting class. And so I trust that Deion Barnes, and I trust that, Knowles coming in, and just the history of being able to develop really good defensive ends, and also having an example like Dennis Sutton to look to, both in the film room, on the field, off the practice field, when it comes to a guy who has done it, a guy who has developed and played early and played really well early, but also has developed into a guy who will probably be a first-round pick, this time next year. I like where that defensive end room is leaving spring camp. Defensive tackle is a little bit different in that. Well, it's similar in that you have a nailed-on star of a starter in Zane Durant. Like, he's kind of the denied Dennis Sutton of the defensive tackle room, so to speak. But Alonzo Ford, missed spring after, suffering a season-ending injury late last season. He's the second most experienced guy in that group. And Xavier Gilliam is the redshirt freshman, the second year guy who has gotten the most publicity, coming out of post spring ball. So those are the three where James Franklin earlier in spring said there's a tier. There in terms of the tiered systems here, looking at defensive tackle, it would be Durant, Ford, and Gilliam. But what really intrigues me is what's behind those guys.
Yep. Yeah. James Franklin mentioned the fourth name that he kept coming up with was DeAndre Cook. And then he'd say like Ty Blanding, Caleb Artis. But then he came back again and he was like DeAndre Cook. It was funny just the way he said it. It sounded in that moment like DeAndre Cook had a leg up for the fourth DT spot. But Ty Blanding got some run late last year too when they were weak in depth-wise at that position. It's just a classic case of James Franklin always wants them to be 2.5 deep at every position. Defensive tackle as much as anywhere because of the wear and tear that it takes on a guy's body and the fatigue that happens. So you're looking to try and get 5 guys. Right now they've got 3 that they feel really good about. And then you got to find 2 more, whether it's Blanding, Cook, Caleb Artis. They do like the freshman Randy Adarica a lot, but I'm not sure that the athleticism, the physical nature of the Big Ten, I'm not sure he's ready for that yet. But they do like what he's done. I think if I had to decide right now, it'd actually probably be a 6-man rotation with Artis, Blanding, and Cook getting work all together. But I do think that that's another position that we thought Penn State could add in the transfer portal. And, portal's long closed by now. Not really any smoke there. They're probably not adding at that position anymore. Probably not adding anywhere else at this point. And I think they're going to go into the fall with, what's there. And it's a good group, but similar to defensive end, they need to prove themselves and they need a couple of guys to play well. They really need a guy like Xavier Gilliam, who we're penciling into a starter spot or at least a starter-like spot. They really need him to produce. Like that's a non-negotiable with the way this room is set up. And that's a lot of pressure on a young guy.
It is. Yeah. It's a lot of pressure. I think there's confidence in the Lash building that he's going to be able to take that step. Mm-hmm. There's also, a lot riding on Alonzo Ford coming back healthy and good from the injury he suffered late last year. He played a role for this team and he's got experience, but it's not like he's Devontae Thomas, coming back and having a boatload of experience. So that even is a small question mark. One other name to throw in there that we haven't mentioned is Owen Wafel from Michigan, the transfer that they added in the winter. But he's a bit more of a project, and I wouldn't necessarily expect him to step in and be an instant transfer portal impact contributor. So that's kind of the defensive line. We talked linebacker. Let's get into the secondary because honestly, I think this section of the defense, the back end, intrigues me the most because of the way that Jim Knowles likes to run things and the amount of talent that is in that group, both at cornerback and safety. Even after you lose Jalen Reed, Kevin Winston Jr. at safety and Jalen Kimber at corner, you could argue that this will be the bedrock of the defense. So we'll start at cornerbacks. I feel like AJ Harris is, if he didn't already last year, I feel like emerged, and he has a potential to emerge as like a first-round lockdown corner. But there's a hell of a lot of other talent in that room as well.
Yeah, there really is. AJ Harris is he's gonna turn some heads this year. I think you were on him all year last year, but people who aren't maybe super aware of his name yet will be by the end of this season. Elliott Washington just continues to dominate the offseason. He's obviously played in some capacity for 2 seasons. It was a big recruiting win. When they got him, he flipped over from Alabama years ago. Like, he's been a fixture in this defense for a couple years now of this roster on special teams, but the guy has just taken the bull by the horns this offseason and is playing really well. And so you've got those 2 guys, but it's more of a 3-man rotation out there when you talk about Davian Collins too, who just keeps getting better every year since he's transferred in here. He continues to get buzz. Like, the dude is competitive. We've learned that in our short time at practice in the spring. Like, he will tell you when he beats you in a rep, which is a good thing for a corner. I think you got to have that mentality, and that's without us even seeing anything from Zion Tracy this year, who, was the nickel last season in big moments, played really well. You could see the development happen in real time for him, where he was starting to learn the scheme a little bit better. He was sticking into his responsibilities more, rather than just playing off instincts. Like, he could be really good if he's out there. They like Kenny Wosley at the nickel spot. They like Colin Dinkins at the Wosley spot, or at the nickel spot is what I meant to say there. But anyway, it's like, this is a 5 or 6 man deep corner room right now. And that's without mentioning the freshman Darius Dixon, who's been really good. Like, it's just a really deep group with 3, 4, even maybe 5 names at the top of it that you just go into the season saying these guys can make a difference for us. And that's incredible depth right there.
It's a phenomenal job by Terry Smith, the corners coach. What he's done in that room over the last few years has been really good. I mean, me and Bob talked at length about Phil Troutline and the offensive line and what he's been able to do at that group when me and Bob talked offensive depth chart last week. Same deal with Terry Smith. There's a reason why John Mitchell, redshirt freshman, decided to transfer out. He's a Florida native, so that might have been a part of it, getting closer to home at Georgia Tech. But another part of it was certainly the amount of talent in the room. And John was probably good enough to contribute he might start and probably will start for Georgia Tech this upcoming season. But, those reps, those snaps weren't there in Penn State's corner room for him to be, for him to have this fall. Like when you lose a player like that with the upper trajectory and the potential that he has, like, that's just the cost of doing business if you have that much talent in the corner room like Penn State has. And you mentioned Zion Tracy. Just one thing to add on him. I thought everyone knew he kind of had a rough Peach Bowl, being thrown into the fire that way when, King and Johnny Dixon, like those guys opt out, and going up against Jackson Dart and Trey Harris and those guys, like that was a really tough responsibility. Yeah. That's a tough draw. But the way that he grew last year in his role really impressed me. The way, AJ Harris just stepped in and was just plug and play, absolute stud last year for them. Under the radar a bit nationally. I don't think he'll be under the radar much longer, if he even is right now. Max, at safety, we wrap things up on the defensive depth chart breakdown. We've got Zaki Wheatley. He's the guy, right? Like he's the guy coming back. You lose Winston, you lose Reed. Zaki was a guy who needed to really prove himself last year, and he proved himself in a huge way, especially down the stretch, especially in that Notre Dame game, in the CFP. I thought he was playing his best ball of the season. If he's able to carry that over and really command that room, then they're in a really good spot. But you've also got some young talent in there. You got King Mack coming back after leaving for Bama and then making the return to Happy Valley. You got Dejan Lane in the mix as well to start. Your thoughts on that group, that upper echelon, and then maybe a name or two to watch at safety behind them.
Yeah, it's a deep group. It's not quite as deep as the corner room is, but Colin Dinkins is going to factor in the safety position as well. I mean, obviously he can play some nickel too, but he has been a safety by trade over the last 2 years. Don't forget about AJ Belgrave Shorter. He's come on this offseason, done a really nice job. They don't let anybody take the single digit numbers after he was wearing 23. He's up in number 3 right now. So, I would keep an eye on him for sure. He's a fun player, smart kid who did some nice things this spring. And then you talk that puts you at really 5 guys in the safety room that you can use and play a lot. If it's 3 safeties with one of them coming down to the nickel spot, or if it's just the 2 in the back end, you've got 5 names that I think you're pretty comfortable with. I mean, King Mack struggled a little bit to produce at Alabama and get on the field, but they know him here. He knows Anthony Poindexter. He was going to contribute at Penn State last year if he was here. So I'm pretty confident that getting a full offseason back in Happy Valley is going to be good for him, and he's going to be at least a productive player. He might not be in the first set of rotations, but he's going to play. Obviously, he had a little bit of an injury in the spring that we've mentioned, but he will play. Dejan Lane is the X factor, though, in my opinion. I mean, you mostly know what you're getting from Zaki Wheatley. He obviously played great down the stretch, very athletic, nose for the ball. Those are all the things you say about him. But Dejan Lane has the potential to be a superstar. I mean, that's It's plain and simple. He kind of has the KJ Winston build. He's got a big body, really physical. He has the potential to be the superstar, and he doesn't have to be it yet. Maybe it's a next season thing for him to earn that first round draft position, but he needs to be what they think he can be this year, and that's an everyday, every snap starter in the back end, and I think he can be. But if this room is going to succeed, I do think a lot of it falls on his shoulders, despite having some adequate depth back there.
Absolutely. And just one thing to note too, as we talk about the secondary, obviously Penn State ran, 4-2-5 and, mix and match last year as well. But I think it's just going to be even more accentuated this year with Jim Knowles coming in. And you saw him mix and match a lot with Ohio State and the guys that they had in that room. I think of like players like Hancock, and obviously you had Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, safety corner, like bigger bodies, guys who can also stick and hold with receivers. And I just think there, in terms of a depth chart, like setting something out, obviously you have your two outside corners. That's going to be AJ and probably Elliott Washington, and Zaki will be in there at safety. But I feel like there's a little bit of flexibility and an ability to get 3-4 guys in there and playing and get them experience, especially early in the season when they've got the early run in that they have against the teams that they have. In terms of learning the defense is going to be key, but also I think the talent that they have in that secondary is really going to let Jim Knowles cook and let him, really get not even like too funky, but really like pose a lot of problems for opposing offenses. And I think we're going to see that really, take hold. That Oregon game towards the end of September is what I'm really looking forward to seeing, and seeing how those DBs in that secondary hold up against the Ducks at Beaver Stadium. Max, that's going to be the first real big test for this team. Obviously, Ohio State in Columbus is going to be a huge test as well. We expect this team to make it back to the college football playoff, especially after a few points, a play away from going to the national title and playing Ohio State for it all. Coming up just short in Miami. But there's reason why there's optimism for this program going into 2025. We outlined the talent and the depth they have on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, a lot of talent and depth and the portal additions on the offensive side of the ball. Do you think number one is fair? Because I put them there. I know ESPN, Mark Schlabach, they put out a way too early top 25 this morning. I had Penn State number one. A couple of other outlets did as well. Is that fair or foul, Max? Tell me straight up. Act as if I'm not in the room. Tell me if I'm dumb.
No, Johnny, it's fair. I mean, and you're the guy who has the AP vote anyway, and I assume, barring any unbelievable changes between now and the season, they're going to get your number one vote. And I think they should. I think as soon as the blue-white game ended, I would not have put them as number one because, we weren't, I mean, I guess technically the Pena signing had happened that day, but since spring ball ended, they've added Trevor Pena and they've also added Amare Campbell. And those are genuine important hole fixers at positions where if they didn't get those guys, I thought that could hold Penn State back from being a preseason number one. But if you look at the teams that were there last season in the Final Four in the CFP, Ohio State just had 15 guys drafted. I know it was in the double digits. I don't know what the exact number was, but that includes a quarterback, 2 running backs, a wide receiver. Like, they lost a ton. It includes 2 defensive ends. It includes 2 defensive tackles. Like, Ohio State's going to reload. They're going to be a really good team, but it's really hard to come back from a national championship team and lose that many guys and, still be a preseason number one. Notre Dame lost their quarterback, a couple of really good defenders as well. Oregon lost their quarterback, running back, a couple of receivers. Georgia lost the quarterback. I'm not sure if that's a bad thing for the Bulldogs, but they did lose the quarterback. Texas lost the quarterback. Like, it's just all of these teams that were in the upper echelon last year have gone under some really serious roster changes. Penn State is the only one that gets a quarterback back. They get almost the entire offensive line back. They get 2 really good running backs back. And they've brought in wide receivers that you assume are at least going to be an upgrade over last year's team. And they brought back part of the defensive line. They brought back a bunch of good in the secondary. Preseason rankings never hold. But if you're looking on paper right now, Penn State is probably the team you feel like you can trust most in college football right now.
After the national championship game, so this would have been January 20th, I like a lot of people put out a way too early, 2025 top 25.
Mm-hmm.
And I had Penn State number 2 because of the returning talent, because of Drew Aller, and especially the step that he can take. And I thought he took really big strides last year. If you really look at it, the numbers and the tape, you look at Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Zaki Wheatley. Like teams across the country are reloading right now. Ohio State lost 14 guys to the NFL draft, Georgia 13, Texas 12, even Oregon 10. And there are a lot of first-round picks in there. There's even a lot of day two, second and third round guys who in other years might have gone in the first round because it wasn't like a top-heavy talent. Like, there wasn't top 5 talent to be had in the 20s this year in the draft, but there was first-round talent to be had in the second and third rounds. And a lot of those guys came from those programs. And I don't doubt that the Oregons, Ohio States, Georgias, Texases, even Michigans, schools like that can reload. I don't doubt that at all. But you look at the formula and the blueprint that led to Ohio State winning the national title last year. It was built on the back of returning talent, of retaining their best players and committing the resources and investment financially to do that. Michigan did a similar thing the year before. They both had veteran quarterbacks. They both had a reliable running game, like the offensive lines, everything that they did, and it led to their success in hoisting the national championship trophy. Penn State is following that blueprint. My two biggest concerns when I put Penn State 2 in January, the only reasons why I didn't put them 1 was we didn't know who the defensive coordinator was going to be officially at that point, even though there were murmurs and rumblings of Jim Knowles. And we didn't know who Drew Aller was going to throw to because we knew that an overhaul was coming at wide receiver. And the fact that they added Pena on top of Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson, when those two guys came in with the winter portal, they got to perform. They got to show that they can perform at a Penn State national title level. But at the same time, they addressed that problem in my eyes. And then you add in Jim Knowles, who just had the number 1 defense in the country last year, who just won the national title, and you drop him on a unit that was already really good last year and obviously lost Abdul and Jalen and KJ and all those guys. But the talent and the schemer, the mad scientist, getting him in the door, like I just think right now it's hard to find a flaw on this team.
Yes.
When you look at it holistically. When you look at Ohio State and even Alabama and some of these teams where it's like, you got to replace the quarterback, like, that can go one of 2 ways. I think, you already know what Drew Aller is and what he certainly can be, even if he improves upon last year's performance. And so that's my long-winded way of saying, I think Penn State deserves to be preseason number 1 right now. We're sitting here in May. Injuries can happen in August. That's why I had a disclaimer in the top 25 being like, there's a chance this changes by the time I submit, my August preseason ballot for the AP. But right now, that's where I stand on Penn State. And I don't think it's crazy, or I don't think it's like too ambitious for Penn State fans to expect them to live up to that as well.
I wrote a piece, I think it was in January, it might have been early February, but I was comparing what Penn State's done in this offseason to what Michigan and Ohio State did last year. Those national championship teams were heavy on seniors and graduate students who had been there for multiple years. And that's exactly what Penn State's got going right now. And the thing with preseason rankings is it's preseason rankings. They haven't played a game yet. You're going off of what you think based on how the roster's been built. Have they addressed the questions from last year? And if that's all we can go on right now, there's no reason Penn State is not the number 1 team in the country, because the questions were passing offense and linebacker on defense. And they've addressed both of those things, even in the past couple of weeks, even this week. And they've really made they've done everything right along the way. You have to give credit where it's due to James Franklin and Pat Kraft for identifying the fact that this is a national championship caliber core to this roster and going out and doing whatever it takes to add the pieces that can push it over the top. They still got to win the games. They still got to play the games in the fall. They gotta put it all together. But if you're looking at it on paper, there's no reason this team is not a preseason number one.
That's where I stand. Obviously, like I said, it's May, right? It's May. I don't know for sure that Penn State's going to win the national title. No one does.
Right.
No one does at this point, right? But in terms of what they have on paper, in terms of positioning themselves in the best way they possibly could to go out and do it, they've done it so far. They've put the legwork in. It started in January. It started in the days after that Orange Bowl loss to talk to Nick Singleton and talk to Drew and talk to Denai and Katron and get them on board. And a part of it too, we've talked to those guys since that game, and a common theme, a common thread of a reason why they came back was because they were upset. Like they felt like they could have won it all last year and they want to do it. And that is the mindset of this program. That's the mindset of this team. That's the mindset of the players, coaches, the administration, Pat Kraft. That is the mindset of Penn State going into this upcoming season. And I think they deserve the recognition of putting themselves in a position. They got to go do it, right? They got to go beat Ohio State. They got to go and finish in the CFP semifinal, go to the national title game and win it to actually do it. Duh. But I commend them for their efforts so far, and I think they're well positioned to attack it the right way.
Yeah, well, you've heard it from us. Now, why don't you tell us in the comments if you're watching this live or if you're catching us on the recorded version? Is Penn State good enough to be number one? We certainly think so. Appreciate all of you who have tuned in for this blue-white breakdown. Remember, Johnny and I are going to be with you every Thursday at noon, unless we need a pinch hitter here and there. Bob was there for me last week. But, we think Penn State's number one potential this fall. And, we're going to be riding that theme a lot here this summer as we talk about, the hypotheticals surrounding this team and lots of recruiting, of course. Could be, hint, could be another big one this weekend for Penn State on the recruiting trail. The Lions are hot, but stick with us every Thursday at noon, Johnny and I, and tell us, can Penn State be number one? Thanks for listening. Take care.